Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Don Arnosti. Don is the Conservation Program Director for the Izaak Walton League. He has nearly 30 years experience in Minnesota as a conservation advocate and organizer, working on bird and wildlife habitat conservation. So, Don, you're ready to roll.
It's wonderful to see, to me, new faces. I've been doing this sort of work for 30 years, and it's terrific to just have an issue that the public gets, the public really gets. And we're way behind when it comes to laws, practices, habits that people have with regard to thinking about this component of the ecosystem. You were hearing from experts on this issue this morning. You're going to hear some more from some more experts later this afternoon. I'm not an expert on pollinator issues. I appreciated coming and learning from these folks. My job is I work with the Izaak Walton League. How many people here have heard of the Izaak Walton League? Raise your hand. Terrific. This is an educated crowd. That's great. How many of you are members of the Izaak Walton League? And I know we have some in this room. Great, thank you. The Izaak Walton League is 96 years old, and it's a conservation organization. It was born in the Midwest, out of Midwest conservation issues. Got to figure out which way to move this. Okay, I guess I didn't put the mission statement in there. But the mission statement, the Izaak Walton League is defenders of soil, air, woods, water, and wildlife. And this mission statement and this mission was devised before words like conservation and ecosystem were in common use. But if you think about it, what the Izaak Walton League is talking about is all the parts. And of course, we know from Aldo Leopold, one of his favorite sayings, the first rule of intelligent tinkering is to save all the parts. So it's really good when you're taking apart your car in the garage or your dishwasher, you're trying to fix something, save all the parts. Well, we humans have been taking apart the ecosystem for as long as we've been on Earth, but we've gotten some new tools since the Industrial Revolution where we can take it apart even faster. And what we're finally talking about and what the public is intuitively getting with this, pollinators are part of those key parts to the whole ecosystem, right? The next frontier, I heard somebody this morning mention Gabe Brown. Look him up. The next frontier is really looking at the life in the soil. I'm not going to go into that today, but that is really a critical part of the whole ecosystem. And if you love pollinators and you love pollinator plants, you really have to understand what's going on in your soils and so much more. So look up Gabe Brown. So Izaak Walton, who was he? He's this old dead guy. And he was actually the author of The Complete Angler, which was one of the first, you could say, sporting publications ever written. He wrote about how to be a fly fisherman in this book that was published, I guess it must be 1653. That's probably why I put it up there. So the Izaak Walton League was named after this gentleman, but he was long dead before it got going. This man, on the other hand, was a alcohol dealer during Prohibition, and he's one of the founders of the Izaak Walton League. His name is Will Dilg. And anybody know what this place is? Jim, you should recognize it. Yeah, this is the Mississippi floodplain in southeastern Minnesota, southwestern Wisconsin. One of the key organizing issues that got Izaak Walton League formed was the threat to the Mississippi River floodplain and backwaters habitats. And the outcome of this man's hard work, he was a legal, legitimate liquor dealer before Prohibition, but there's rumors that he never quite left the business. But he got really interested in conservation about that time because he was an avid fisherman and hunter in this landscape, and there was a threat by the Corps of Engineers at the behest of farmers to drain and dike this whole floodplain, much like the river looks down around St. Louis, for those of you who are familiar with it. Tall, high levees, and the floodplain is now in corn and soybeans. Not very good pollinator habitat. So the rumor is that he did go to Washington for 3 or 4 years and worked Congress very, very hard And the rumor was that, you know, his access to illicit liquor was maybe part of getting the votes necessary. I don't know if we can ever confirm that, but this is the legacy, the Upper Mississippi River National Wildlife and Fish Refuge. And this is a 200-mile stretch of fantastic habitat along the river. We all benefit from it. So that's the one of the founding narratives of the Izaak Walton League. Oh, here's the mission statement. There we go. This is a broader mission statement, as we mentioned. I'm here today to maybe connect pollinator habitat. We've been doing an awful lot of focus on local habitats in your yard or in the farm field or field edges and all that. We're going to step back here after lunch, take a breath, and take a look at some of the continental and hemispheric issues and recognize that pollinators are those important, as we heard, those important connectors between, for instance, most of our native flowering plants and trees and a lot of our food system. So I'm going to focus for a little bit on the very special place that we have in North America. Right up in here in Minnesota, we're kind of, I like to say we're at the top of the funnel of the Mississippi River Flyway. And I describe it as a funnel because if you look at how they show, these are a lot of bird migration pathways. You notice that there's a lot of birds that sweep out of the Caribbean and South America, even Central America, follow the habitat corridor that is the broader Mississippi River Valley, and then up here in Minnesota where we fan out into multiple rivers and move on into the Northwoods and the Great Plains of Saskatchewan. Many of our birds move all the way into the Alaskan Arctic. Of course, we know there's pollinators that follow some of the same corridors, most particularly the charismatic microfauna that is the monarch butterfly, that amazing bird, the amazing insect that with a brain, you know, the size of a pencil point, somehow navigates and understands where to go and come back, even though we're talking about multiple generations to make that kind of a migration. It's just fascinating, and it keeps us humble and realizes we know far less than we think we do. And we sure better not screw up and lose this part, right? This part of the ecosystem. I also think that the monarch butterfly is our key organizing organism for pollinators. While we know that monarchs are not, let's say, super pollinators and certainly are not the big picture, this is the charismatic insect that probably the vast majority of Americans could actually identify. And they're not afraid of it, right? So those are two important things. And I think it's awesome that we've been able to get beyond, I mean, so many people who say the bees are out in the fall, you know, of course they're talking about wasps and they are worried about them. We're kind of replacing that narrative with let's get pollinator habitat out there and let's understand that it's about honeybees, which in their own way are alarming and people's catching people's attention because we have better population estimates. These are captive hives, and we're able to learn that half of them are dying over the winter or whatever. But the same thing's happening in the natural world, as we were hearing. So monarchs are an incredible organizing tool. They're a very good ecosystem monitor too. Are we doing a good job? We need to plant more than just milkweed, of course, but milkweed is important. And they use essentially that same corridor for migration. In 2014, the weather radar out of St. Louis picked up this amazing blob, and the weather forecasters were very alarmed by it because it was a clear evening or clear late afternoon, and there were no clouds visible, and they were wondering where these storm clouds and this system was coming from. They did a lot of investigation. They finally realized this was monarchs migrating. So the weather folks have gotten used to the idea that they can pick up birds. And of course, that used to be new too. You know, and I imagine the technology is getting better, but the weather folks are in a position where they can actually track. This is This is a mixed flock of warblers, which may be moving soon. We'll see them up here in May. I don't know exactly when they hit the Gulf Coast, but this is a huge flock of birds moving onto the Gulf Coast, being tracked by weather radar. And many people who are active bird monitors are aware of that, and they use that to help track, for instance, the waves of warblers that are returning to Minnesota. Sometimes it's hard to imagine the flocks of birds that can be involved in migration. And here's a picture. Sometimes they're mixed flocks, sometimes they're even or single species. And as I mentioned, we're getting good enough that we can track birds, bats, and even insects like monarchs on weather radar. So we'll talk just a little bit because we want to celebrate the beauty and wonder that is Minnesota. Warblers fly in mixed flocks, and they're coming in most instances from tropical locations, Central America, the Caribbean, and South American forests. They are cued primarily by length of daylight. So they're less able to adapt to changing climate like today, where probably the local vegetation and perhaps some of the local insects are going to respond to this warm weather and the warm weather we're going to have over the next few weeks, and they're going to get their season going. The birds that travel from long distances do not know what the local conditions are in Minnesota. They're, the various species may be in Costa Rica, they may be in Venezuela, they may be in Brazil right now, and photo length is their cue to travel. If they come up here at their usual time, which they will, sometime in May, they may find that the plants have flushed, have bloomed, have set their fruit, or the local insects that respond to that kind of thing have already come and maybe not gone, but have declined, and they come up to actually diminished food sources. Something to be concerned about. Anybody know what that bird is? Yeah, that bird comes all the way from Argentina. So it definitely doesn't know what the weather, it likes summer all the time. So it leaves here in the fall and goes down there in the spring. So it lives in spring, summer, fall, year round. But they have a long way to go, and they breed in wonderful grasslands and diverse pollinator habitat that we might call native prairie or fields.
Did you say that's the bobolink?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
People didn't hear.
That's the bobolink. And beautiful songbird, and you'll see it perched on maybe a post or a wire somewhere near a grassland and in a grassland. I know a grass-fed farmer, a grass-fed beef farmer, who monitors the bobolinks to decide when to hay his field. He makes sure that the bobolinks are off their nest and mobile, and then he hays it in a manner that the mobile birds, the young birds, can run away and not become part of his haybine. One of the things that I found interesting in listening this morning to the experts on pollinators is so many of the techniques and the approaches, like the citizen science that the Xerxes Society is using for identifying bees, bumblebees, and of course the technology that hasn't been available, but it goes back to some of the techniques that bird watchers have been using for 100 years or more, which is citizen science, things like the Christmas bird count or various other citizen census activities. So it's really the next generation of activities applying new technology like a smartphone to upload and gather the data even more quickly. But groups like the Audubon Society since 1900 have been capitalizing on folks like you who like watching and being involved in the natural world to gather your observations and not just make them personal, which many people do just for personal reasons. I tap the maple tree in my yard every year, and I kind of keep records of when it flows and how much I get, and that's just personal, but it actually tells me something about our weather. But it's a way to aggregate this information, and I think St. Paul Audubon Society put out a really interesting booklet about 10 years ago, was it, Chase? That was called Let me see, Go Native to Sustain Songbirds, and you can still download it off the website of the St. Paul Audubon Society. Well, what's interesting about that is that was titled to attract the bird lovers and bird watchers of the St. Paul Audubon Society. What it actually was plants that are popular, native plants that are popular with insects, being the food for many birds, right? But it didn't say go native to get a lot of insects in your garden, because especially 10 years ago, that probably wouldn't have been so popular. Everything's connected, right? So there's this terrific native plant book, and that was where that booklet, which Chase helped put together and other people, that booklet was where I first understood how awesome the oak tree was. Those 536 species that was mentioned earlier today. I didn't realize, I'm a forestry guy. I love trees and I love the forest, but that was a piece of it that I didn't know, just how terrific the oak tree was in comparison to other trees in terms of hosting a variety of insect species, which of course certain bird species like to eat, and it all comes around. So here's some more of our favorites. Anybody know what these birds are? Shout them out. Yep. Yep. Well, I heard a lot on. Yes, it's a redstart. I heard a redstart. Yep. Great. Now this one I'm not even going to ask. But this is one of our favorite bird species. You put that up like a monarch butterfly when you're talking about pollinators, right? Everybody can recognize it and say we love it. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of problems that these birds have. I'm going to just kind of quickly flow through a few things, but then we'll come back home and work in the upper Midwest and Minnesota. Of course, I spoke about winter homes of some of these birds. Many of them are found in tropical forest habitat, and we've all heard about this and seen this. We're not going to focus on this today, but we can't forget about it. You don't have the bird if you don't take care of its complete life cycle. You don't have the monarch if you don't have the migrating way stations along the way. You can't just have breeding habitat up here and some little refuge down in Mexico. The monarchs have to get between here and there. And that's some of the migratory way stations. Same thing goes with birds. That loon that I showed you, that's 6 years ago next month. We can't forget the people who directly died as a result of this. Of course, we saw these pictures of the underwater flow. Our loons go and winter, and in fact, their juvenile year, which is a non-breeding year, they're spent exactly in the area where that oil flowed out into the Gulf and directly contaminated the ecosystem. And a lot of the dispersants that were used to sink the oil beneath the surface so that the American public would stop remembering it. I have a brother-in-law who's an oceanographer, and he's been down in Alvin and those deep diving type things right in this area. And he's told me that there's a 2 to 3 foot deep layer right in the bottom sediment, which is these dispersants mixed with oil sitting down there. So it's smothering the bottom of the ocean ecosystem. And our loons, baby loons that are being born in Minnesota now, are born with traces of that oil dispersant in their system that's been carried through the ecosystem back through their mother. And 6 years later, 5 years later, last year, they were showing up with this. So everything's connected. Now, Gulf problems, we've all heard about the dead zone. The red represents areas of oxygen depleted in such a manner so far that most life can't survive during a certain period of time, usually late summer. The yellow is obviously somewhere in between in terms of degraded oxygen. Well, this Mississippi dead zone has Midwestern fingerprints. So let's take a look at those fingerprints for a minute. The fingerprints really get back to our method of commercial agriculture up here, corporate agriculture, the predominant way. Pesticide application, fertilizer application, we know that results in loss of pollinators, right? Directly, We haven't had a lot of talk. I think the next session this afternoon is going to talk a lot about chemicals and pesticides with regard to pollinators. But fundamentally, there's three things you need to do to protect pollinators. One is get good habitat. One is manage the habitat properly. And the third one you might call part of management, but it's the chemical use. Get rid of the chemical use. That's really what is needed. And our industrial agricultural system violates all three of those, right? That also results in excess nutrients flowing down the Mississippi River, creating the dead zone. So we have problems of unregulated drainage and uncontrolled erosion, which puts those nutrients into our waterways, impacting all life. But if we take the Mississippi River, I guess I put this out of order. That's all right. We'll get back to it. So this is a problem. This is obviously the opposite of the type of agriculture that Jim was talking about. What we have to remember is I'm an organizer, right? And my job, I'm the conservation program director for the Izaak Walton League. My job is to help people discover ways to live their values through specific action. That can be all the way at the personal level to the community level. At the personal level, every dollar you spend on food is a vote. You're either voting for pro-pollinator agriculture and food production, or you're consciously or unconsciously supporting the kind of agriculture that creates a lot of problems. So I was really pleased with what we ate for lunch, because I know those particular businesses are buying their food from the farmers that get it and that are doing the right thing. And that's something that we should all try to do as much as we possibly can at home. It's very hard to do it when you go out, but when you can identify some individual restaurants and locations that do this, if you have a favorite restaurant, even if they don't do it, just start asking questions. Just ask questions. Where did you get this? What kind of farm did this come off of? Do you know what the source of this is? And that's part of protecting pollinator habitat, is supporting the farmers doing it right and moving away from the farmers who aren't. Farmers are very sensitive to that, and they will respond. I want to get back to some of what we really enjoy here in Minnesota, which is the river of birds that swarm up the Mississippi River Flyway, which is one of the harbingers of spring, right? With a day like this, you're kind of saying, where's the bird song? I mean, this day should be happening in late April, right? We know that. It's 5 weeks early or 6 weeks early. But a part of ordinary spring, not radically disrupted by strong El Nino and global warming, would involve bird song and the excitement of seeing some of the early migrants. This is a red-shouldered hawk, which is a bird that it's a short distance migrant. It won't go all the way to the tropics, but they will nest in the bottomland hardwood forests of the backwaters. And the cry of the red-shouldered hawk is, for me, part of early spring and summer. Here's another summer bird. Does anybody know what that is? Cerulean warbler. Yep, that's right. That's a very difficult bird. You can understand why it's named what it's named, but it's actually really hard to see, because they nest and live most of their life like 100 feet off the ground in the tops of tall trees, tall canopies. But this is an area, an area in southeastern or northeastern Iowa, which the local ornithologist called the Cerulean Trench. He called it that because some of the elevation can be gotten with shorter trees growing up a tree slope. They like to have that sort of skyscraper living type atmosphere. The surrounding fields are much of Iowa. This is where Iowa feathers into the Mississippi River. And so you have some terrific habitat in this area for this small, beautiful, beautiful singing bird. And it's a lot of fun for people to pursue that and learn it. If you're interested in the cerulean warbler, if you go down to the Yellow River State Forest in northeastern Iowa, that's been identified as a globally significant refuge for these birds in our area. a very significant landscape. So this is a gang of thugs. These are non-breeding, probably mostly males. Those are the ones we see hanging out on the Mississippi River. The breeding takes place in shallow wetlands, or deeper wetlands, shallow lakes, along the Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota border area. But these birds are commonly seen on the Mississippi River, and I've heard all the way up into the harbor of Duluth. So the population's expanding. These are fish-eating birds. That's a good thing that they're expanding. It says the fish are getting a little healthier. There's a few more of them, right? And apparently, there's only so many females to go around, and there's a certain number of kind of juvenile, lower pecking order males that hang out in gangs. We get to watch them, but they're not part of the reproductive population. Anybody know what that bird is? Yeah, prothonotary warbler. That's a gorgeous bird, just a brilliant yellow bird, and it's a cavity nester. You'll see it in association with water and cavities in trees. So the floodplain forest again. You can often see it when the water comes up in the spring. This year I don't know if the water will come up because it's melting in such an awkward way. We're getting the whatever winter runoff is happening now. These birds aren't going to come back until May. And so the floodplain forest may very well be dry, but I enjoy birding by canoe, where you can literally come within a few feet of these birds. They are pretty skittish and shy. They're not ones that like people around, but if you get a look like this, Laura Erickson took this picture, and they have a beautiful song as well. So in the fall, the river of birds reverses, and millions and millions and millions of birds move down the Flyway, as do, of course, the monarchs. And ducks, of course, attract many hunters and many wildlife watchers to the Mississippi River. Anybody know what this bird is? It's found along the Mississippi River. Weaver Bottoms is a popular place to see it, and other similar areas. Yeah, that's right. Tundra swan. And it comes down from the Canadian tundra and I believe also the Alaskan tundra, but just that whole subantarctic area. And this is a great late season birding spectacle. These birds will fly 1,500 miles or so and then stop nonstop, basically over much of Canada. So they take off from their breeding grounds and they fly 1,500 miles, and they stop along the upper Mississippi River for a big buffet. They gorge. If you can imagine a bird like that flying for 1,500 miles, it's a great diet plan, right? So they need to refuel to finish their migration. Most of them from here finish their migration over in the Chesapeake. So we're very lucky in this part of the world to be some of the few people who are not flying in a light airplane who get to see a tundra swan up close. Because most of the rest of the country, the birds are flying at several thousand feet, I believe, as they move from here to the Chesapeake. Terrific spectacle to see in November. And then, of course, we have our River of Monarchs, which gets us back to the pollinators. I'm just fascinated. I mean, I can imagine that there may be enough space in a bird brain to figure out celestial navigation, photo length navigation, other cues. Birds tend to live anywhere from 3 to a dozen years. So you can imagine that maybe one generation might teach the next generation where to go for winter habitat, where to come back for summer habitat. But in that little monarch brain, I mean, it's just awesome to try to even comprehend. How can multiple generations pass through that kind of knowledge where they don't know each other? They lay an egg and die, and that next generation grows up in a little pinprick brain to figure out exactly where to go in Mexico, and frankly to come back to Minnesota and other places like that. Let's not throw away the parts, right? And then of course, I'm going to show you a video, at the end of this, just a short little 3 or 4 minute video that the Izaak Walton League put together on the Mississippi River in a year and a half ago in the fall. And it was, for me, the day I was out there with the videographers and kind of helping to sort of assemble some of the interviews, the particular day that we spent in late or mid-October of 2014 in Pool 7, I believe it was, of the Mississippi, no, Pool 8, I think, of the Mississippi River, to me was, I'm old enough to remember Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom on TV. That was one of my signature moments as a child. It was one of the few things my parents would let us watch. Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And I learned about the Serengeti plains and the wildlife migrations that were abundant over there. This is America's Serengeti. It's right in our backyard. Go visit in the fall and just watch the mostly flighted wildlife migrating through. Broad-winged hawks, northern goshawks. This is just to remind me, who's been to Hawk Ridge up in Duluth? Okay, that's another choke point where you can see that river of wildlife moving through. Hawks and eagles and other raptors coming from the Canadian forests and having to funnel for the most part, they move by soaring to conserve energy. And the upward moving thermals, heated upward moving thermals aren't very good in Lake Superior, right? Cold water underneath, that'd be a downdraft. That's a downer. So soaring birds do not like to cross large bodies of water, at least cold large bodies of water like Lake Superior. So they move southwesterly along Lake Superior and funnel through the high points, Hawk Ridge in Duluth. It's a terrific place to see them in, really starting in late August, well into October. So I mentioned global warming. We all know about this. This is just a quick, this is a zone map that gardeners are familiar with. And this is just facts that are put out. And you don't have to see the details. You just know that, take a look at the dark color, which is zone 3, and how little of it's left in just 16 years, right? These are just the facts for gardeners. It's already 10 years out of date, so I'm sure the map's out of date. But you can see many other things. Minnesota had none of this zone 5 in southern Minnesota, and now look at it on the right. So these are birds are well aware of this. They move to the extent that they're able to move, but they're able to move to the extent that the habitat can adjust. And the same can be said for all the insects and all the other pollinators. Can those soil microorganisms move as rapidly that we know are so important to the plant growth? I doubt it. Our forests are changing. Our boreal forests are disappearing into Canada. That is, when I say our, I'm talking about the Minnesota boundary. And basically, more southern forests like red maple and maple are moving into what we think of as the northern woodlands. This is a map that's been put together using breeding bird atlas information and some of the other citizen science information. And basically, it just maps between 1966 and 2006, basically a 40-year period, aggregating all that data. Once we had computers and we could look at millions of pieces of data, scientists were able to identify these are the movements of birds. You don't have to worry about the individual species, but you can just generally see this is where the midpoint of all the observations were in winter habitat for particular species. As you can see, the birds are moving generally northward in some direction, trying to chase acceptable habitat. This has a lot of implications for those 400 species of wild bees we have in Minnesota, right? I doubt they're able to move as rapidly and easily as the birds. And of course, both of them are dependent. I mean, the birds aren't just moving. If they go there and find that it's nothing but acres of corn, they have no place to go, right? They may have the right climate conditions, but if they don't have the right vegetative conditions, they don't have a home. Same can be said for the pollinators. So the National Audubon Society collated some of this information along with climate change projections that they took from the UN climate scientists and learned that by 2050, these are Minnesota statistics, The common loon, as a direct result of just global warming climate change, will lose 56% of its summer habitat. That means our lake shores, our lake habitats are going to change just as a result of that. There's the other piece about lakeshore development and lawns to the edges and jet skis disturbing, nesting loons. This is just the habitat change as a result of climate change. Blue-winged teal, same thing, even larger habitat loss. Golden crowned kinglet, that's one of my favorite super early spring migrants. To me, that's an early migrant and it's a late migrant, and it's kind of the signal of certain things. I haven't seen them yet. Have you, Anna? Yeah, I think we're early for them, but the weather feels like they should have already gone through here. But they're going to be losing 70% of their habitat in Minnesota. And the white-breasted nuthatch, that is my favorite bird, because that's the upside-down bird. That's the one that goes down the trunk looking for insects upside down, so I identify with that going against the grain. Okay, global warming, there's a lot of things we can do about it, but that's another talk. So we're not going to focus on it. What challenges do birds and other wildlife face along the Mississippi River? This is focusing primarily on agriculture, and this is where we really bring birds and pollinators together. 50% of Minnesota's landscape is in agriculture, intensive agriculture. And is it 85 or 90%, Jim, is in corn and soybeans, literally. Of all of 27 million acres of ag land, something like 85 or 90%, it may vary a little bit from year to year based on prices, but overwhelming majority of it is in one of two crops, both of which are raised in a manner that is destructive of habitats, destructive of the river ecosystem, destructive of adjoining pollinator habitat. It's a real problem. So remember to vote your food dollar. Don't forget that. So we're going to talk a little bit about solutions. So as I said, big challenge, sediment from farm fields. When the farm field is bare 7 to 8 months of the year, which is what it is when a traditionally planted corn or soybeans are there, you get a lot of erosion, you get a lot of nutrients, you don't get a lot of habitat. When you have tile drainage, which is underfield perforated pipe that whisks water out of the soil profile and discharges it like a sewer pipe straight into ditches, streams, things like that, you get water on the land, it moves quickly into the drain tile, out into the drainage system, you get a lot of stream bank erosion, a lot of redeposition. The governor was trying to address this issue, not the drain tile itself, but the actual issue of erosion with buffers. And we know buffer strips would be terrific pollinator strips if they're planted properly. The law last year only required perennial vegetation. So a mown Kentucky bluegrass lawn or reed canary grass is sufficient to meet the requirement of the law. We need to have people rise above that, right, to get a few more benefits. When you have water rushing down the stream, you wind up with a lot of sediment. This is a delta of, I believe, the Cannon River joining the Mississippi River. And I'm a fisherman. I love to fish. And one of the best places to fish is, of course, an estuary or an area where one stream flows into another. But this is a terrible place to fish, as you can guess. That stream bottom is being changed all the time. The microinvertebrates and the basic elements of the aquatic food chain are missing in this area because they're constantly being buried by excess sediment coming down that system, as well as nutrients that ultimately flush down the river. Anybody know where that picture is taken on the left or right? You know what that is? Yeah. This is the Minnesota River coming in at Pike Island, joining the Mississippi River right in the metro. And obviously this was after a rainstorm, but it's not a significant rainstorm. Any old rainstorm does something like this. Tremendous amount of sediment and nutrients coming off the primarily agricultural landscape of the Minnesota River. The Mississippi River at this point has primarily been flowing through a forested, less agricultural landscape. And down here, this is that blended river body where it hits the St. Croix River at Prescott, Wisconsin. So, that's a visual depiction of what's wrong with agricultural practices, and all of these things tie back in many ways to pollinator habitat. So turbid waters inhibit aquatic plant growth, turbid meaning sediment and other things that block the light. And of course, the cleaner water can grow plants. The underwater plants need light, just like above water plants do. They need light, and if it's too sediment laden, you won't have it. You won't have the fish. Who needs the fish? Some of our bachelors need the fish. Who else need the fish? Some of our favorite birds. And by the way, certain animals like to eat the plants as well. Anybody know what this is? Yeah, canvasback duck, and of course that's the tundra swan there, and here's a muskrat, marsh builder. I'm going to flip through some of these quickly. Persistent high water behind the dams erodes land. This is the change over time. We get open water habitat in our kind of pools behind the dams. We have invasive species. There was a big announcement this week that the scientists have maybe come up with a stalling series of techniques to try to hold some of these invasive carps further down the river while the research is ongoing to how to control them long term. A big fish like this was caught well up the Minnesota River. You might remember that. So we're going to move very quickly through this. Enough of the bad news. What is it that we need to do? Here's infiltrate water where it falls, practice sustainable agriculture and urban habitat, buffer waterways, restore damaged river habitats, and vary water levels. I think we can see both. These are ways to hold water on the land, terrific opportunities to have pollinator habitat, whether you live in an urban area or you're a farmer. As I noticed, there was a landscape architecture firm back there that was saying, we're here to help you design a beautiful yard that's friendly for pollinators. Buyer beware, question your nursery about neonicotinoids. There was a change in state law that allowed basically deceptive labeling last year of native plants. So just because you show up at some place and it's a native plant, you still need to find out if it was raised without neonicotinoids. The legislature removed the provisions that made it illegal to label a plant that was high in neonicotinoids as pollinator friendly. So it's buyer beware, unfortunately. We've talked a lot about habitats and pesticides. Other people will talk about that. Sustainable perennial agriculture can be very beneficial for birds and insects. This is mob grazing on pasture. And mob grazing is very intensive grazing for a short duration, which leaves the grassland habitat fertilized, kind of regenerated, and it's usually left then for months to even a year before coming back. Lots of opportunity for pollinators to inhabit the area. You heard other things about agriculture and habitat, buffering our waters, opportunity to do direct mitigation of our really the Mississippi River is what's indicating to us whether we're doing a good job on the agricultural landscape, and the bottom line is we aren't. There's a lot of problems there, so this is remediation in the Mississippi River bottomlands, and this is something that I don't have time to get into, but it's a way that we can manage the water behind those navigation dams to restore these habitats. I think the final message I want to leave is that we can make a difference, and I think a room full of people such as this is very empowering. I want to invite all of you to join the Izaak Walton League on April 6th down at the Capitol. If you want to go back to that table in the far corner there, you can sign up. We're going to do training for citizen advocacy. We're going to bring in lots of people from around the state, and you're going to hear later today about some of the specific provisions that are being proposed in the state legislature to protect and advance pollinator habitat. If you've never been to the Capitol since 6th grade, this is your chance to do it. We'll give you training, and you'll go with buddies, and you can meet with your legislators, and you can represent your values to them and tell them that you expect something from them. I'd like to close with a 4-minute video, and maybe I can get some help here to pop it up.
This is the lifeblood of America.
It's just an artery that I don't think we could live without.
This river goes all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, and it starts all the way up in northern Minnesota. This is huge.
We wouldn't be here without the Mississippi. It's our lifeline, it's our bread and butter, so to speak.
What happens in the Midwest and what happens on the Mississippi River affects all of us.
Every drop of rain that falls ends up in the Mississippi somehow. It's just a question of how do we, as humans, interfere with that process.
It's the great collector of all the things that we do right, but more often it's the collector of all the stuff that we do wrong.
Probably one of the biggest problems the Mississippi River has, up and down, thousands of miles, is sedimentation.
Basically, from the time of settlement, we started to destroy the prairie and the natural systems that were here for agriculture and urban development.
Mississippi has a complex mix of problems. They don't outweigh what it's doing right, but if not maintained for multiple uses, it's going to suffer more and more.
We can learn our way out of the mess we've created, I think.
The habitat work that we were doing on the Mississippi River is definitely making a difference. I'm extremely proud of the work we're doing. If you get in the upper parts of the Mississippi River, you see a mosaic of habitats that you can't believe is there.
We have a challenge if we want to keep the beautiful river that we see today. Is we have to be engaged, we have to fund habitat restoration, and we have to do a lot of it. We have to do it along the entire upper Mississippi, and we have to do it every year. If we don't do something every year, eventually it'll just be gone.
People are drawn to the Mississippi River.
The Mississippi is everything to everybody.
It is a river of commerce. It is a river of recreation. It is a river of inspiration. If we don't take care of this resource, what kind of message does that send to the rest of the world?